Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am the Associate Artistic Producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and today I am joined by the amazing Ryan Borochovitz, one of our co-artistic producers. How goes it, Ryan?
It goes. How are you, Jill?
It goes for me as well. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Today, Ryan and I have the great honor to unpack the world premiere performance and run of Hypothetical Baby. This was a show put on by the Howland Company. It is a solo show that is written and performed by Rachel Cairns and directed by Courtney Ch'ng Lancaster. And it had a run in the middle of December here in Toronto. So at time of release of this episode, the Toronto run has closed. So today's duet review is going to be about Ryan and I kind of unpacking the piece and sharing our thoughts on it. And hopefully this piece gets more legs in our country, in the world, which we'll get into why it is so necessary. But before we jump too far in, I'm going to bring us into our usual icebreaker. What are you sipping with us today, Ryan?
So I have coffee. It's
Nice.
this is our last review or episode of the year. So
Correct.
end with a classic drink and in a classic cup. So there you have it. How about you? What are you drinking?
I also have coffee with the cheers with the silk peppermint mocha almond creamer that's in grocery stores right now. Not sponsored. In one of my favorite mugs. It's my Marie Disney mug. Marie is one of my favorite Disney characters because ladies don't start fights, but they finish them. And I just thought that's kind of relevant about what we're chatting about today. And a happy accident, my water cup. This was on one of the other episodes we just recently did too, but I recently got these water cups that, based on how cold the beverage is, it changes colors. So it's actually pink, but it's blue because it's cold. And it matches my mug
Mhm.
exactly. So I'm like, well, that's amazing. Yeah, and a wonderful happy accident that I need right now because again, we'll get into it, but there's a lot of female things happening with Jill right now that any any semblance of organization is key. And again, we'll unpack all of this as we dive in. But I guess we shall dive in, Ryan. And again, like I
Yes.
said, because this run has already closed in Toronto, we are not going to do a spoiler alert. We're really going to just open everything up. So I guess as like a tiny precursor, if you don't want to stick around, you can stop your episode now.
If you aren't watching this at time of release, but you're watching it in anticipation of another future production of
Correct.
this that you are excited to see, treat this as your spoiler warning. Apologies. The show's great, go see it, but
Yeah,
we're going to talk in detail about it.
indeed.
Mhm.
Okay, so I will give us a little synopsis of
Please do.
Hypothetical Baby. So, like I said, it is a show written and performed by Rachel Cairns, and it is an autobiographical solo show that has us come along the journey of her abortion, an experience of her going through an abortion, and it's not just that; it's that to start, and then the entire sort of network of what having a uterus is sort of unfurls and the relationships you have, how that impacts, and the socioeconomic status and what it means to be a woman and in society. And there's lots of things that come up, including throughout the whole show. You have Rachel through speech and gesture taking us on this storied journey, but then you also have a canvas behind that has a projection of facts about specific things that have to do with abortion and the female anatomy and things that we might not know or things that we definitely probably don't know because it's not in the education system. Um, yeah, so we go on her journey of being an artist and being faced with becoming pregnant and deciding to have an abortion and the sort of physiological and biological breakdown of that, and also the relationship she has with like her mom and her partner and her coworkers, and how that all sort of peppers in. And it's neat, kind of the structure of the piece. Rachel constantly comes down stage and sort of not amends, but takes us back and be like, well, actually, this is the beginning of the story, or this is where the story ends. And the sort of end comment about that structure we get is, well, the abortion is the event, and anything leading up and anything beyond her life now, it is continuously existing. There's a lot. I was very impacted by this. Being a woman, being an artist, this show really, really touched me. A lot of emotions of frustration and, and it wasn't just me. Like, every woman in the audience was shedding a tear or nodding their head or under their breath laughing because something like this has happened to them or a loved one. And like I said, throughout the whole journey, Rachel has such an astonishing delivery. And when it comes to like the fact pockets of like trying to explain sort of her brain going a mile a minute because of hormones, which currently mine is, because I'm about to get my period soon. And so PMDD is what I have, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where my thoughts can be racing and I can go down rabbit holes and I'm bloated and my uterus is screaming at me. So like currently Jill's experiencing these things right now. But just kind of going back to the precision and the speed and in the fact pockets of the show, that it's information that we need and we've been longing for, and everyone in the theater is either learning or relearning or unearthing. And it's not present in our society. It's not present in our education. So like, it just, watching this show again meant a lot to me in multi-layers, but even just the sheer fact of being an artist, seeing a fellow female artist using the art form to be a platform to really like bring all of these everyday normal facts about women, not issues or, crises about women, to the forefront and making it personal but educational in the same breath. This has become like a synopsis and also my appraisal in the same breath.
That's good. We're not doing the spoiler shield for this one. Let it all just tango together.
Tango together. I know that's been my like word of the latter half of 2023. So I mean, we'll get into sort of like the like practical sense and how she performed and what have you, kind of what we usually do in these duet reviews. But I really wanted to, in this synopsis, just take a moment of like, it's really refreshing and needed, this piece to be on a stage. Constantly, again, me being a woman, having premenstrual dysphoric disorder, like every month I go down the rabbit hole of and the pitfalls of what my reproductive system can do to my brain in everyday life. And that changes when you become pregnant, that changes, as you grow, that can be impacted throughout life. And it's not linear, and every woman is so, so, so different. So it was really lovely just watching and listening to Rachel's story and finding so much of the camaraderie of what she's going through or what she's discussing. But in the same sense, living under that shell of like, oh my goodness, like all of us are so different. So like, if we can find some sort of common ground and like a basic script of what happens inside of our bodies, that's a great place to start. And again, just using this moment to say like, it is astonishing to me still in 2023 that our education system and society at large knows very little about the female body, including women, right? So anyways, this piece seemed like a beacon of light towards towards that. Ryan, do you want to share your thoughts as well?
So good. Like it's funny, like as we were leaving the theater and kind of like just talking about the show before, sitting down to do this recording, is I thought you said something interesting to me about how, like, this might be like a pretty short review because, like, the show says it all. Like, what do we have to add? And I think, like, yeah, yes, that, but also just unpacking this kind of like what you're doing right now, this emotional response to it. I think that's what we have to add. Like, and
Yeah.
you get intellectualize all you want, but she's done an excellent job of intellectualizing this issue from so many different angles. Like, the thing that I think is, for me, and obviously I cannot relate to all the things that you're talking about, and I recognize that, of course, but like, I still thought the show was excellent and fantastic. And I actually had the thought occur to me, like, I don't think, is this a flawless show? Maybe, because I can't actually think of a flaw. That's feels like pretty high praise for it. But yeah, like, I think what I think this show does so well is autobiographical solo shows in particular can, not always, but can have a tendency to be very myopic. That it is like, let me tell you my story. It is filtered through my individual subjectivity. There's nary another body on stage for me to even discourse with, even if I conjure up other characters, that it's me talking to myself, basically, and my imagination of what that person would or is saying. And that is a tendency and a valid critique that, like, solo shows in general have, and especially autobiographical ones of that nature. This show seems very aware of that as a pitfall, and did everything in its power to make this the least myopic show you've ever seen. And considering it's a show about her personal experience having an abortion, you would kind of forgive it if it became myopic a little bit. And yet I think the thing that it does so brilliantly is that it leaves no stone unturned, that it is very much undergirded by this personal narrative of, this is the story of my abortion, but she used that as the diving board, her jumping off point, to be, this is a show about the complexities of reproductive health, about what it means to, have even the access to abortions, and how that's changed through history, and how it's different everywhere in the world, how the pandemic factors into it, how climate change factors into it, how the economic crises, many different types of crises all factor into it. And it's very possible that there is some facet of this discussion that she neglected to address, but I am having a hard time thinking of anything because of how thorough and comprehensive this overview is. And I think it speaks to the fact that Rachel, as it says in her bio in the program, that she has, and she mentioned it a few times, like, around the performance, that she has this podcast called Aborsh, which I haven't listened to personally, but now I kind of want to, because I'm sure
we'll pop it in the comment, or in the description below.
We'll put it in the description, because check that out. And I imagine it probably deals with a lot of stuff, and the podcast format, hey, you're listening to a podcast right now, is very, a good way of putting people in dialogue and encountering with ideas about covering a topic from a variety of different facets. So I think this is very clearly a show that isn't just, let me tell you about my personal experience and maybe you can understand the broader implications. This is a show that takes those implications first, and uses the narrative structure of her own personal experience to tell that larger story, not the other way around.
Exactly. And a lot of that, again, kind of picking up what you're saying and hearkening back to how I was saying, the use of the digitized screen behind her throughout, like, in the story, she goes down a Google search rabbit hole, searching so many things, but specifically when it comes to facts about abortion, or like about the being a person living with a uterus, and looking up what a placenta is and sort of the life history of the placenta. And it's in her story that shows up. And then we also see that on the back of the screen. And similar to when we enter COVID territory, like, she's talking about how her experience, with that transition in her life. And as she's speaking, that again, the board is peppering, like, universal stats about certain things. And I think that was a brilliant sort of like accessory to her personal story, because again, it was like, once again, every step affirming that this is a universal this is way more than just my story. Like it's a representation and an information session about what I'm talking about. And I guess even to add to that, now we're getting into like the technical elements, but so not only was that screen for me that extra step outwards to sort of globalizing this topic, but even her costuming, and I always love talking about my costuming. She had just like a ponytail and then this white t-shirt tucked into some jeans with white sneakers. And because the main play space she was on was like a sort of like white box, so that also the projection shows up quite clearly. Anytime she's sort of standing and there are those facts or those articles on top of her, she's wearing white. So once again, it's her voice telling us these things, but it's the universal message that's just showing up on her, and she quite literally blends into the screen.
Yeah, like that's such a great point. And like if she had been wearing like a darker color or something, she would stand outside of the screen in front of it, and yet she becomes the screen through which this, like, very, very literally, she is the vehicle through which this larger story is told, not something that stands in front of it or lets it stand behind her. So yeah, very well said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I guess also too, like you and I have seen a lot of solo shows, or at least, and something that really stands out to me, and I actually talked about, or we were talking about this post seeing the Lehman trilogy, of like when you have minimalist set and like props, and sometimes you're, as the actor, monologuing or needing to use your entire instrument to play various different characters. Usually it's infused with like a very specific gesture and we even chatted about this on our It's a Wonderful Life duet review as well, but a very specific gesture, and it's theatricalized, right? And it's very specific and harkened back to, so that it's like over the top in a way that makes sense, because you're letting your audience know we're going back to this character. And what I really admired about this piece, and I think it goes back to talk like what you brought up of how this piece was trying its best really to not be myopic, is in the tone of Rachel's voice, like shifted when she was like her mom or her coworker and what have you, but it was very fluid, like, and we didn't need like the same like theatricalized gestures to know who was in the scene or who was sort of a story guide with her in that moment. So I really like that. Again, it's this fluidity and deterring away from these sharp gesture, like sharp edges. And we're gonna get into like feminine form instead of masculine form here in a second, or for a second, because I talk about this all the time of like, the female structure of a play versus the male structure of the play. And Carol Churchill is a pioneer of that, right? She was kind of one of our first female playwrights where she didn't write the beginning, middle, end, a Freytag's pyramid sort of vibe of structure of how we digest theater. It was more how the female reproductive system and like our menstrual cycle and how that goes. So again, this is getting so specific, but there is something to that, like very stylized, rigid gesture that is kind of male in a way of like, it is a punch and then we're done. It is a climax and then we're done. Whereas a fluidity and a build and using different elements to show character, because like I said earlier, we aren't linear. Us living with uteruses are not linear. So kind of infusing the physicality choice with that was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And like something I'll add to that, because yeah, she didn't do like we were just talking about with It's Wonderful Life, that every time Uncle Billy comes on, the patting the head, or that sort of like visual semiotic language for this is this character. But shout out to the lighting designer, who Julia Howman is her name, because there was, every time one of the recurring side characters was brought on, even though Rachel herself only manifested the difference with her tone of voice, there was always a lighting cue that corresponded to each one. The mother was always tinted red. Like that was just such I forget, and I'm trying to remember, did the partner have a specific color? I feel like it was kind of like more like bluish incandescent tones maybe, but
Yeah, I
I
don't know if that one was as obvious, but that definitely was like a vocal shift was.
Mhm.
Like I also kind of like that too, where it was like lighting shift or vocal shift
Mhm.
or maybe like a subtle gesture. Like these three like different like ways of showing difference of characters were implemented throughout the piece, but not like we're not using the same way. I also want to give massive praise to the stark emotional shifts that Rachel brings herself through in this piece. Because once again, that is so indicative of what it's like to go from this super high emotional state to a super low, or yeah, it's very talking about. I'm even noticing in this review, like talking about yeah, living with the like there are so many dips and peaks and valleys. But just to go from how do I even unpack this? Like in the storytelling, right? Like we wouldn't be inside a flashback with her and she'd be so emotional. Like you can see the tears welling in her eyes. But then she would take herself out, come down stage and like just be back to Rachel 2023 discussing what we just saw or like where we're going to go next. And again, it's a theatrical device of like just shifting sort of frames, if you will, but it's such a ripple effect of you can go from laughing and living your best life to absolutely breaking down and cowering into a little ball in the shower. Like that's, yeah, like that's so again, I'm watching this as actor being like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like, look at those pivots, look at those stark, like emotional states. And then it's like talk about ripple effect. I'm sitting there, tears welling in my eyes because I'm like, oh, that's also how I acted this morning, being a woman, just a human, trying to get through whatever the hormone imbalance was doing in my own brain. Um, Yeah. Sorry, that was me opening. I'm
no,
just
that's okay.
opening up again, not apologizing, but yeah.
No, don't, please don't. And like I definitely like, in addition to just all of the female body health that you're kind of unpacking here, it's very understandable that you found this story very relatable, just in terms of like the whole subplots about the life of an actor and the economic
Yeah.
precarity about that. Like how many times did we glance at each other while watching? Like, this is a conversation we just had yesterday that she's
Yeah.
unpacking here. I don't know if you want
Can,
to speak about any of
well,
that. Don't feel like you have
can you unpack the fig tree for us and then I'll pick up a
to.
fig
Sure.
and expand and relate.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. Spoiler alert: I've never read The Bell Jar.
And
But
neither have I, but it's on the top of my list now.
yeah. Apologies to the memory of Sylvia Plath, but so there's one kind of a sort of recurring image in this play, although it really is focused in one scene in particular that alludes to this instance in The Bell Jar that I will do my best to describe. But again, I'm getting this secondhand from the play, where it's describing the life of a woman kind of being that you have this whole fig tree and you want to choose, the ripest fig, but you are plagued by this debilitating indecision. And which one do I pick? Each one represents a different option for my life. And the longer you wait to pick, the sooner that they will all dry up and wilt, and you don't get to have any of them because you couldn't choose between them. I hope I'm doing that description justice, but that I see you nodding. You want to pick up the baton here?
Well, I just noticed before you even went into it, you're like, this is a recurrent, literary harken back to throughout the piece. I'm like, oh yeah, because every single day it's what we think about. So it makes sense that it's a recurring theme in this piece. Yeah. Especially like you just said, and like fully relating to Rachel being an actor and myself being an actor. So choosing, I guess, talking about this through the lens of choosing um, a bit more of a freelancy contractual job as a woman. Every single day, you are I don't want to say plagued because that sounds so daunting, but you are faced with, especially, me, myself being in my late 20s, you are faced with the decision waking up every morning. I'm doing a career that I love. Financially, I'm getting by. My biological clock is ticking. I would like, personally, me, Jill, I would love to have a child, some semblance of a family down the line, but I don't want to give up my career path that I've chosen. So I'm coming to terms with the fact that there might be a like abnormal societal or sort of non-traditional upbringing of my family, or what my role as a woman will look like, because I will have to maybe sacrifice certain things. Or then then comes the list of negative questions of like, well, why are you doing this to yourself? Why you should be getting on having children as soon as possible, or there's other career paths that you should be doing, or there's this and there's that, and then don't even get me started of like the subconscious, like baked in the back of the mind of, I should be doing this chore, or I should be doing, which I will say, as everyone knows, Ryan is my partner. He absolutely does not put any of this on me. This is just subconscious, back of the brain things that us women sort of deal with. And so, yeah, so with this image of the fig tree, of you have all of these figs that you would love for them to be the juiciest, right? You would love for them all to be fully ripe and flourishing, but there's like, you're constantly seeing them shrivel up because the society we live in doesn't support, like, oh, maybe I will have to take time. And this is where, again, it's a universal thing too. It's not just being an actor, you'll have this problem, but it's like women in general, like you could have the toppest tier job. And then if you and your partner maybe can't get a good childcare substitution when you have your child, you being the mother may have to step down from that top tier job to take care of your child. So like it's an inaccessibility of childcare, and there's just like the entire support and spine of our society forces women to have to cut down. I don't even want to say shrivel, but like literally cut down some of the figs. And we're left with, at the end of every day, being like scanning our options and thinking like, is this the right choice? Like, if I can't have this, like, am I okay if I choose this? Yeah. So, yeah. And it's everything to date, like that contributes to this, like the patriarchal society we live in, like I said, inaccessibility to childcare, the lack of financial support for women to take time away from their career to raise their children. This idea, this like, unnecessary, but like pressure for, once you get to the top of your 20s into your early 30s, it's like, okay, it's still like, look out, like you should have your kids now. And there's still like stigma, right? Like if you decide to freeze your eggs, or if you decide to not have children, and there's just like this, there's people having that choice is not available for everyone. First of all, like in many cultures, it's still not. But even those who do choose to either not have children or freeze their eggs or do something that is, again, outside of the norm, there's still external pressures, whether it be from like even like a sigh from like an aunt at a holiday party or something, right? Like, again, I feel like I'm having another soapbox moment, but it's like every woman is so different and has their own trajectory and their own path. And we should just be supportive of whatever they choose that roadmap for them to be. Well, and if they want multiple figs at once, they should be able to have it. Maybe you want to jump in here.
I don't even know what to specifically pick up on. Like it's interesting. It's a while back I read this book. It's called Forms by Caroline Levine. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name. Apologies if you're watching this. But yeah, it was kind of about, it was sort of like about formalist literary criticism first and foremost, and how there's, the deconstructive movement kind of, pointed out that forms are oppressive and we should do away with them. But her book was more about this kind of rehabilitating that forms are there whether we like them or not, and then we kind of just need to have a more nuanced understanding of them instead of just trying to jettison them and hope if we cover our eyes they'll go away. And one of the examples she uses in this book, which I think speaks to part of what you're alluding to here, and part of something that's brought up in the show here. She's an academic, so a lot of her examples in real life situations come from academia, but how she said that there's the tenure clock, when you can be expected to get on track to, have a tenure track and full tenure job, and then the biological clock. And these are two forms that exist that are in direct opposition to each other. And it's tempting to say that the tenure clock being the social construct and the biological clock being this biological construct, that the tenure clock was invented to keep women out of academia. But what Levine, apologies, points out is that the tenure clock was invented not to keep women out of academia, but at a time when women were just not even considered to be entering this particular workforce. So it was never even something that occurred to the people who set up this natural rhythm of this job calendar, that it would need to one day compete with the biological clock. So it wasn't like, and this is, when the people try to conceptualize patriarchy as just the evil men making decisions that will, these things are much more systemic and ingrained than that kind of cartoon villain approach to it. But now we have women entering the workforce in academia. Obviously that's been happening for a long time, but now that we have, this, we shouldn't retain this long antiquated idea of this is the natural rhythm of the tenure clock, because as a result, it is going to bar women from pursuing these jobs at their own reasonable time frame. Yeah. So, and I think that's kind of, I know you unpacked it in, I think, a lot more interesting and personal way here, but it's just recognizing that these are, just because these two things exist and weren't even brought into existence to compete or force each other out, doesn't mean that we can't be taking action to remedy the situation if we recognize that the tension exists between them. Is that kind of, do you think that's sort of doing justice to some of what you're saying here?
Yeah.
Or am I misrepresenting? Yeah.
No. I totally agree with that. And one thing that I just want to bring up, this random factoid, which I feel like is kind of a direct tendril of what you just brought to the forefront here, is at time of recording, the Canada Labor Code has mandated menstrual products in washrooms in Canada now. So I want to toss that factor. I forgot that I had run into that earlier. But yeah, that hasn't been a thing until time of recording 2023. But now it means that people living with a uterus, when they are working in a federally mandated building, there will be pads, tampons, etc., accessible to them, so that they don't have to bring their own. They, don't have to miss a shift or be late to a shift because they have these. We can't help what comes out of our bodies.
But we can help the way we structure our society around accommodating that, if we care to do so, as we should.
Absolutely. Another factoid I'm going to bring in to here too, because I think it's relevant. A post that I came into contact with recently, again, post the show. This is I guess a brilliant instance of our phones are listening, because I've been having a lot of facts kind of filter onto my feed post show that I'm yes, make me keep learning. And, but let this sink in for a second. Breastfeeding for 1 year is 1,800 hours. A full-time job with 3 weeks holiday is 1,960 hours. So not much of a gap there. And just going to show that I think we also need to reframe the sort of multi-layered humanness that people living with a uterus have to live their lives, like wade through the world, like especially those that are like wanting to have children that are, you know, have like a massive hormonal imbalance, anything that our reproductive system is causing, like impeding everyday life, is like walking around with an elephant on your back. Like it's that much more difficult to do basic things. And it's not in like a, oh, difficult, hold my hand, like rub my back. No, it's like, I can't help the way that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Anyways, we went on a little tangent there, but
yeah, if this will be, I guess, just like not to get us back on track, because what everything you're saying is not off track at all.
Yeah,
it's very
yeah.
much within the world. But just to, I guess, pivot to something else about the show that I thought was interesting is thematically, I think more than, I don't want to say more than anything, but certainly a recurring theme, I think, throughout this is negotiating the dissonance between we have it pretty good and it's not good enough. And I think that is something that really started as early as the land acknowledgement. And it was a very kind of very interesting, deliberately written land acknowledgement that was presented by Rachel herself kind of immediately before the show, with very little separation between the land acknowledgement has ended and now the show proper has begun.
right.
Where she, did the kind of standard, these are the indigenous tribes that are the, the stewards of this land, but then kind of went into talking about it. It almost kind of gave me Cliff Cardinals As You Like It vibes a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is going a little more deep than land acknowledgements usually do, and maybe this is going to be the whole show. But spoilers for that show. But she kind of started talking about how it's Canada is surprisingly progressive as far as modern nation states are concerned about reproductive rights for women and abortion in particular. And yet the great dissonance and irony with that is that has this terrible ongoing track record with the way that it polices Indigenous women's and Indigenous people's reproductive rights, their relationships to their children, takes their children away. And acknowledging one does not discount the other, that we're surprisingly progressive in some regard, but very much not in other regards. And I think so. And then, having that as this prologue to the piece that kind of goes into, that became a recurring theme throughout, that wow, why is everything so difficult? And then learning from her mother just how much more difficult things were as recent as the 70s, and then learning from her Pakistani friend that wow, the long journey about the history of white feminism you just learned is actually a drop in the bucket compared to what people around the world encounter, and so on and so on. And then how does the pandemic impact this, and hey, what is my partner going through in this instant? Because while that is by no means the whole story, it's part of the story and deserves to be kind of interrogated in its own right. And it's like what I said earlier on, that like no stone is left unturned in this story, and the nuanced portrait that kind of unfolds from all of this is, even when things are better than they've ever been before, or in this particular circumstances as good as anyone in history could ever claim, it's still not enough, and and it pales in comparison to what like other people have to deal with, the struggles, and none of those things disregard or discount any of the others. It's just an interconnected web of problems that eventually need to be resolved, and we're still working on it, even in places that can boast some modicum of progress.
Yeah. Wow, that was very brilliantly said, as like a summative overglaze of that theme.
If I said it brilliantly, it's because Rachel said it more brilliantly.
Yeah,
and I'm just
fair.
trying to
No, but like that's good. That's good. Again, internalizing what we saw on stage, and how it impacted us, and what are the next steps. This definitely is a piece too that, because it's so educational and informative, like you leave it to me, it like balances on the fence of course it's theater, but it's, like I said, there were so many pockets of like rapid fire facts or like emotional states that like it this piece I'm going to be percolating for several weeks and beyond, and definitely left inspired and impacted and encouraged to continue learning and continue being an advocate. This is marinating. I think also seeing this piece, again, bringing it back at like the peak of massive hormonal imbalance on my end. I'm really excited to sort of think back on this piece when I get my brain back a little bit, my own personal brain.
But it's also okay that you encountered it in this state because it allowed it to impact you in a way that it might have maybe wouldn't have if you were in a different part of your cycle. And maybe, you would have still related to, I'm sure, to a lot of what was being said. But, it is, it's you're approaching it from a different perspective, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. Like this I really hope this piece continues to have legs, like whether it's done in other cities around Canada to start, but then even like going international, and maybe even as well being educational tools, like in schools or high schools even. Because a lot of what Ryan and I sort of continued to learn, or maybe learned for the first time, we certainly didn't get from our textbooks. So yeah, and kind of like what we've been talking about this whole time of it leaves no stone unturned. And there's so many instances where there's multiple articles and Google's search engine tabs open. And I think like that's what this piece asks you to sort of continue doing post your viewing. So yeah, I mean, you and I, we could keep unpacking and talking, and new things will blossom out of this discussion, and for days and weeks and months and years to come. But any final things to sort of cap off the episode on your end, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's so many more things I could say about this show, but I think we've done a pretty good job of rinsing out sort of the core ideas, and you've spoken so eloquently about all the personal resonances, which I think is very much needed and is what this show is going to provoke for so many people. So I guess it's just a shame that this run is so short, but like you said, I'm sure it will find an afterlife beyond this. And I look forward to seeing, this, like you said, it could totally tour all over the place. I think this is definitely a show that would benefit from as many people who could see it as possible.
Yeah, and I know we've shouted out Rachel a lot in this. We shouted out Julia, but I also want to shout out Courtney Ch'ng Lancaster, our director, like impeccably directed. Yeah. Everything Courtney does is like absolutely stunning always. But like the entire team on this, I think like was pretty perfect. Like you said earlier, like there's ne'er a flaw.
If there is, I did not notice it. So well done.
Right.
We don't say that often.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, echoing what you said, I hope this gets legs, continuing on. And again, this was Hypothetical Baby. It was in Howland Company production happening here in Toronto at Tarragon. It was written and performed by Rachel Cairns, directed by Courtney Ch'ng Lancaster. And the run has closed, but what an informative and needed piece to be on our stages. On that note, I'm going to continue drinking water and sleeping and taking care of myself in where I'm at in my cycle, and it also being December. So cheers, everyone. Stay well, stay healthy. As Ryan was saying, this is our last episode of 2023. Before we fully clink our mugs there, Ryan, let's do our little social plugs. Where can people find and follow you?
No need to find and follow me personally, but if you like me and like hearing my theater thoughts, most of them tend to live here on the Cup. That's at COH Theater on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. It's Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you might be watching this. It's Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast in the podcast place where you might be listening to this. And while you're listening to podcasts, check out the Abortion podcast, because it probably covers a lot of the material that this show did in a different medium and format that I'm looking forward to tuning into.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you, Jill? Where can people find and follow you?
People can find and follow me at Jillian.Robinson96. That is my artist Instagram account. I post covers of songs and upcoming projects, so keep your eyes peeled for future happenings happening over there. And thank you, as always, Ryan, for plugging the cup. And on that note, let's grab our cups, give a nice hearty 2023 closeout cheers.
Cheers.
And like I said, we'll catch everyone in the new year. Bye.